Preparations turned into race day. The start of the cycling season proper. Opening weekend saw fans and riders gather in the Kuurne Velodrome in Gent as everybody came together for the start of 6 to 7 weeks of something really special. No racing for tomorrow. The classics are all about today. Former winners of big classics like Biniam turned up for 207 kilometres against the wind, rain and roads, as well as small farm roads and cobbles of Flanders. The Omloop Nieuwsblad finishing in Ninove nowadays, harking back to the old days of the old Tour of Flanders. Langemunte is an early visit to Omloop past, but Ten Bossen and Paris-Roubaix included in this circuit now towards the end, with Moer and Bosberg to finish, and Mathieu van der Poel turning up to race for the first time in his career, alongside the likes of Tom Pidcock at the Omloop Nieuwsblad. This race nowadays centres around 3 passages around the Haaghoek and Leerberg. The Molenberg included, as you saw on that map as well. And former teammates are now enemies. Van der Poel and Gianni Vermeers now on separate teams. First race day of the season then, naturally Van der Poel taking all the headlines. No Wout van Aert, he was away ill. And there was a group of 5 strong riders up the road. 5 riders, 5 teams, 3 different nations, 4 minutes max. Those riders were Crensen, Aleno, Renal, Van Hemelen and Brunel. And with 80 kilometres to go, the build-up, the nerves and the crashes continue to happen. Groves caught up behind one of those incidences. And then onto the Eckenberg. 2 minutes for the breakaway at this point. Another crash. It will be the theme of the day. It's often the theme of the opening weekend, but this, I think, would be the most crashy Omloop we'd seen in years, unfortunately. One rider dropped straight away from the break with 60 k's to go. That would be Clément Aleno, the young Frenchman from Burgos. Tom Pidcock was already caught up behind an incident and having to make his way back on. He'd also had problems with a rain jacket. Paul Magnier had mechanical problems as well as a crash. There will be a big chase after his push. Kisper Asgreen will be the first man to try it from long range. 57 kilometres remained when he went. That was on the Wolfenberg. And the chasing back on as the peloton chase down Asgreen would continue. Inside the final 50 k's. And they were soon on the way to the Molenberg. But going there'd be crashes for the likes of Stefan Kung, now in a Tudor Pro Cycling jersey, before they got there. Onto the Molenberg, over the little bridge, and then disaster for Rick Pluimers as he hit the ground. Amazingly, getting around him would be Mathieu van der Poel. Foot on the ground, cyclocross skills in full action. He'd soon get to Florian Vermeers, who'd opened up the taps. There'd be a big effort from Tim van Dijk of Red Bull to get across. And then heading back to the Haaghoek, they'd meet the others who were still there from the breakaway. Up the Leerberg they went, and Mathieu van der Poel was already dancing his way up there. Another rider lost from the breakaway. It was a whittling down exercise, as behind a chasing down exercise was becoming a very difficult one. Magnier would return to the main bunch, but with 26 kilometres to go, heading up the Berendries, it didn't look like there would be too much room left to chase them down. A minute of a gap for Van der Poel and company. And yes, you guessed it, I'm afraid, more crashes behind. That will reduce the chasing peloton even further. And leave the likes of Arnaud Delis on the ground. Onto the Moer. Through the Vesten. Carnival week. Party either side of the road. There was only one man who was going to steal the show here. Just as they left the Vesten and came onto the Kapelmuur, Mathieu van der Poel would get his own Moer moment. This climb no longer in the Tour of Flanders, but it was on the same roads as when his dad won the Tour of Flanders years ago that he'd ride away. And just like that, it looked like it was done. Almost 20 seconds quicker than anybody else heading up that small cobbled section of road. Small but sacred. But there was another one still to go. The Bosberg. Always looking foreboding in the middle of the woods. dark, damp, and very nasty. But half a minute with just under 5Ks to go over Vermeers and Van Dijken, who, despite efforts from behind, were holding the rest off for the podium. Van der Poel and his sports director Christoph Rodolph knew that they'd more or less done it. Family waited at the finish line. Alpecin Premier Tech were going to win this race for the first time in their history. And Mathieu van der Poel starting the season knowing that there's a curse. If you win the Omloop, you never win the Tour of Flanders. Well, if anyone can break that, Mathieu van der Poel can. For now, he ticked off a race missing from his palmarès, the first rider in a quarter of a century to win the Omloop on debut. Second place, that went to Tim van Dijken. Probably the biggest result in his career. And Florian Vermeers in third. A podium for him, for the man who had formerly finished second in Roubaix. Christophe Laporte would steal ahead for the next position. And the Omloop Nieuwsblad would end with a solo win after just under 5 hours of racing. That winner on his first day of competition, on his race debut here, was Mathieu van der Poel. So Van der Poel, Van Dijken, Vermeers and Laporte, with Aimé de Ghent in 5th. Lundmeus, Turgis, Renard and Lamperti in the top 10.
I want to say sorry to the rider of Tudor because I almost rode over his head, I think, but I had nowhere to go. So I was unclipped, but luckily I could find my pedal quite fast again. And then on top I joined Florian, who was really strong today as well. And in the end that was the decisive moment of the race, I think.
The podium at the end of it, and Mathieu van der Poel starting as he means to go on this spring, on the top of it. The Omloop Nieuwsblad and its 81st edition, won by the Dutchman. The world's classic stars turned up for Kuurne-Brussel-Kuurne, the second half of the opening weekend in Belgium. Big crowds greeted the likes of Milan, Binyam Girmay, as well as Paul Magnier at the start. Jasper Philipsen, a day before his birthday, won this race last year. He was hoping to do the same this year. This the parcours, 17 obstacles in total, 13 hills, the last of them though. Big difference with Omloop Nieuwsblad coming a good 60 k's from the finish all the way back in Kuurne. Wind and rain will make it a difficult day. And 195 kilometres for the 78th running of Kuurne-Brussel-Kuurne. Recently retired cyclocrosser Eli Iserbit fired the starting gun. And once out of town, the flag was waved and there will be a lightning fast start to the race. It would take a good 45 minutes before 7 riders would become established at the front. And I'm afraid Tim Wellens was one of several riders who went down. The Belgian champion having to abandon the race. It would later be revealed that he suffered a broken right collarbone. 7 riders at the front were Jacobs, Louvel, Biesterbost, as well as De Bont, Ingebrigtsen, Kessler and Adrien. Jacobs on his 29th birthday, the Swiss representing Groupama. With 100 k's to go, their gap was 4 minutes. It was down by around 10 seconds with 90 kilometres left, and then it would come down very quickly. Lotto Intermarché going to work. Arnaud de Lee, though, was put in trouble by his own team. That as other sprinters were dropped behind. And on to Mont Saint-Laurent, where the breakaway had just over 2 minutes. Jasper Philipsen, one of the top sprinters, was at the front and on the attack. Alpecin de Koning having won a day earlier through Mathieu van der Poel at the Omloop. Paul Magnier suffered a mechanical. And there were plenty of problems in the legs for the likes of Groenewegen, De Lee and Milan. Arne Marit was also dropped from that group. And at the front, several groups were attacking each other. Milan made one last dart to try and get and close the gap. But he wouldn't make it. And with 77.5 kilometres to go, this would be the group that will be attacking each other to try and force more differences. Philipsen again on the attack on the Oude Kruisberg. He was well followed though by the likes of Kees Bol and Tobias Lund. Pithy was close to the front. Decathlon were looking good. Several teams ready to challenge them. Brennan also still in the mix for a very active Visma team. Timo Kielik was following plenty of moves for them. It was just his second day riding for the Visma Lease bike team. Also changing team to former Visma rider Dylan van Baarle, now with Soudal Quickstep, attacking at the top of the Côte de Trio, the Knokteberg. All the while the gap was coming down and gaps were opening up. Final time of the day was the Kruisberg. Biniam was following on, but was about to be dropped. Gap down to just 18 seconds with 56 kilometres remaining. 7 in the break were caught. And with 54 kilometres to go, things coming back together. But there was attack after attack at the front. And the usual frustration we find at this time of year, not everybody having the same objective of collaborating. Sprinters who've been dropped came back. And just over 50 kilometres remain. There was an attempt to split it in the win by Christophe Laporte and the rest of the Visma Lease bike team. And Hector Alvarez would go on his own, the 19-year-old from the southeast of Spain, not yet fully professional, looking good. Things were looking less good though for Jasper Philipsen, who had to take Edward Plankert's bike. He'd be forced into another group behind, and he'd be thankful that they all came back together again. Filippo Fiorelli was another new Visma Lease bike recruit, looking good. Philipsen and Brennan still in a good position. That as they approached the first passage of the finish line, and the bell was about to ring. There was an opportunity for Jasper Philipsen to change his bike. This time onto his own bike. And helped back into position. Once rejoining the bunch, just over 12 kilometres remained. And with half of that still to go, things were hotting up. Lotto and Soudal Quickstep moving. UAE with a clever move to let the wheel go. Florian Vermeersen, Ivo Oliveira on the attack. Alex Segaert was chasing well for Bahrain. But that will be stitched back together by Decathlon. Still trying to position Lund properly. Lund boxed on the right-hand side after all that could work all day long from Decathlon. It's being led out now right at the front by Visma Lease bike, and it's going to be Matthew Brennan to strike and go. Laporte does the leading out. It's Brennan at the front. He's a country mile ahead, and Matthew Brennan wins with ease. What a victory for the Briton. There was nobody anywhere near the same level. Brennan wins in Kuurne, and Visma Lease bike have a new classics weapon. Superb stuff from Matthew Brennan, the winner of Kuurne-Brussel-Kuurne in 2026. His first ever win on Belgian soil. Visma Lease bike back as well. Disappointing news a few days before with Wout van Aert having to miss opening weekend. But it's their new star Matthew Brennan who got the better of the two Tudor riders in second and third, Mozzato and Trentin. Govecar and Teunissen making up a good top 5 with Rex, Lund, Bol, Lamperti and Meus in the top 10. Special mention for Laurens Rex in the top 10 just a month after having had 3 fractures to his back. On the podium, Matthew Brennan at the head of affairs. A big win for him and Visma Lease bike. Look out for the rest of the spring.
The stars were out for Strade Bianche. Modern racing on ancient roads. The perfect cycling event we all now look forward to each spring. Siena, the start and finish, champions past and present here, and those hoping to challenge Tadej Pogacar for his throne and that trophy. Wout van Aert, one of those, Tom Pidcock another. Pogacar, well, now with his bleached blonde hair, ready to try and do it for a record 4th time. His first race of the 2026 season, and a slightly changed parcours. A few kilometres less this year, just over 200. Still, the 4,100 metres of climbing and 63 kilometres of dirt roads, sterrato sectors as they're known in this part of the world. That final loop before going to Piazza del Campo, one of sport's great arenas in the centre of ancient Siena. Pogacar was ready to go with Del Toro by his side. Italian racing at the top level on the way for another year. Who would be the winner? It'll be a really fast start, 175 riders, before it was whittled down to 9 up the road, a maximum gap of 2 minutes with UAE doing all the chasing, and not much of a gap left as they approach the longest sector of the race with 92 k's to go, Monte Sante Marie. It's the sector where Pogacar has attacked record distances before. 81 kilometres remain when he attacked a couple of years ago. 79 remained when he went away this time. Paul Sixas tried to chase him. Del Toro was covering well. Matteo Jorgensen looked good too. There were mechanical problems for Tom Pidcock, but he did really well to make his way back. By this point, though, Pidcock was 30 seconds behind Pogacar, who was alone and doing what he seems to always do. New season, same Pog. And despite young 19-year-old Paul Sixas's efforts on debut, Del Toro was there to mark him. Over a minute of a gap with 56 kilometres to go. More sectors to come, though. You always wonder if the calculation, the feeding's been right. And also, look out for that corner. Yes, Pogacar looking around at the area where he crashed 12 months prior. Pidcock would try. There'd be incidents in and amongst the crowds on Colle Pinzuto. But as much as they did try behind, they only managed to get the gap down to just below a minute and a half. More sectors to come, though. Was that a grimace or a smile? The end of the race would tell us that. It was turning out to be a lightning-fast edition. It would go down as the fastest in history. Almost 2 kilometres per hour quicker than that ridden last year. Over 42 k's an hour, the average. Sixas had taken Del Toro away, and they were onto the final sector of the race. They had around 20 seconds on those behind. Pogacar looked like it was a hard-working day, but in the end it was going to be the same result. Smiling at the top of Via Santa Caterina. Ready to celebrate again. 3 years in a row, 4 wins in 5 seasons here, and more wins than anybody ever in the short history of this brilliant race. A 4th victory for the man who does it better than anyone else. And what about next on the scene? Well, tomorrow might be here today with Paul Sixas. Not quite the tectonic plate shifting result if he'd won, but a 2nd place, exceptional for a 19-year-old on debut. Isaac Del Toro completed the podium. The UAE boys did their business. 1 and 3 standing together at the end of the day. So Pogacar winning, Sixas second, Del Toro, Grégoire and Vermeers with a result. The first time that Tom Pidcock has been out the top 5 as well.
It was just beautiful to see all the guys in the team performing so well, and then also the young bullets like Jan and Isaac. What a job from them, and was an honor to ride with such a team today and to deliver the win. So yeah, I'm super happy.
And he would have been delighted to be up there with Del Toro. The big story of the day, though, Paul Sixas right up with Tadej Pogacar. That hype train is picking up speed. The oldest race on the cycling calendar. 1876 to 2026, the 150th birthday of Milano-Turin. But it was the 106th edition of Milan-Turin that's had pauses here and there. And this race now a spring one, with Tom Pidcock, Primož Roglic a former winner, and the rest turning up to race. Beginning in Lombardy, just outside of Milan in Bro, and heading all the way to Turin. The finish in the last couple of years has returned to Superga. Back to being a climbers' race again after a few years as a sprinters' classic. This is a classic finish, and on its 150th birthday, a very special day. A sunny start then in Lombardy, heading to Piemonte, and 144 riders on the start list. The first hour was ridden at lightning pace, as most races invariably are now. It took almost an hour for 6 riders to get up the road. They were Milesi, Ferron, Comrade, Bjogoro, Pietrobon and Mayer. The maximum gap they get would be about 1 minute and 50 seconds. But it was all about pacing to getting into Superga and the first of the 2 climbs on the 176-kilometre race. Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe alongside UAE Team Emirates and Pinarello Q36.5 were the teams that did most of the work, but it was a real fight for position that gobbled up the last few seconds of the breakaway's advantage. Milesi the first to lose contact, the 3rd division rider from Biese Carrera going at the bottom of the first ascent of Superga. XTS Astana would take it up, looking to help out Fortunato and Ulissi, before Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe with the team to really lift the pace. Andrea Pietrobon would be the last survivor of the breakaway. And it was towards the end of the first ascent of Superga that he'd be reeled in. Just after the maximum 14% gradients, we had the first big attacks as well. 20 kilometres remain when Primož Roglic, winner in 2021, decided to go on the march. He was one of a number of options for Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe, who also came to this race with Giulio Pellizzari. Pellizzari would follow on a little behind. Other names reacting, including Alex Cepeda of EF Education Easy Post, Tom Pidcock and Kian Uijtdebroeks, racing again for Movistar, his new team. Those 4 came together before being joined by another smaller group over the top. And 12 riders were suddenly at the front of the race. Jan Christen leading UAE's charge. And 3 riders for Red Bull meant tactical flexibility. They played a card with young Adrien Boissy allowed to go away on the descent. The former mountain biker would take over 20 seconds of a gap. But a bigger group would come back, led by Uno X, particularly Jonas Abramson and Magnus Kort, just before the next ascent of Superga. This will be the final run to the line, just under 5 kilometres at over 9%. Movistar were looking good and Nathanael Tesfazion led them. They were accompanied by Jefferson Cepeda and Kian Uijtdebroeks. Uijtdebroeks has never won a one-day race and he was in feisty mood. Attacking on 3 occasions all the way up. Each time shaking the group out that little bit more. Uijtdebroeks going again with 1.5 kilometres to go. Pellizzari distance here, although he'd been dropped and come back on a couple of occasions. Alex Cepeda had his opportunity for EF Education Easy Post again. And Primož Roglic was part of a group of 5-star riders taking it into the final kilometre and a bit. Rog would go again. Uijtdebroeks for the umpteenth time. The battle, though, was resolved with around 600 metres to go. Tom Pidcock making his debut at the race. Attacking, surveying a gap, and extending it to the line. Tobias Harlan Johannesson was doing his best to follow. Roglic wasn't too far behind either. But with this view suddenly on our screens, Tom Pidcock was confirmed the winner. 150 years of history. And on the race's birthday, it took just one attempt for Tom Pidcock to come and win it. His first one-day win since he won the Amstel Gold Race a few years ago. Victorious ahead of Johannesson, who moved up from third last year to second this time, and the evergreen Roglic, always there or thereabouts. His teammate Pellizzari was fourth, and Kian Uiterbroeks an exciting fifth for Movistar, who are just getting to know him. A handshake between two stars of the game, and Tom Pidcock with victory for Pinarello Q36.5. He's the first British winner since Mark Cavendish. Pidcock, Johannesson, Roglic, Pellizzari, Uiterbroeks, joined by Cepeda, Berwick, Fortunato and Fancellu. Cavendish was on the podium to present the prizes. And a stellar day for Pidcock, who builds up to Milano-San Remo, a race you can watch live and on demand on TNT Sports and Discovery+. Cycling's longest day. The build-up and key to the enjoyment is in the anticipation, and the suspense was building as early as the evening before the longest race of the season. Winners past and present, possible future winners turning up in Pavia for the beginning of Milano-San Remo. Once morning came, and it was early morning for the start, the likes of Philipsen, Van der Poel, Pogacar, Pidcock and the rest were ready to take on the 298 kilometres for the 117th Milano-San Remo. Turchino halfway through, then on to the Ligurian Riviera, the Tre Capi, Cipressa, Poggio. Usual ingredients. What would the finale be? All the question before was between Van der Poel and Pogacar. Would they go the right way or not would be the first question though. In the very first couple of kilometres, it looked as though a break had gone. The organisation cars took those who got themselves to the front of the race the wrong way. So a fight for the break restarted, and 9 riders managed to get on their way to San Remo before the rest. One was trying to control them. His name was Sylvain Dillier, the job he'd done before. An early crash had meant that Pogacar would be without Jan Christen, or Luis Aulard also going out in that early incident. Once by the seaside, things started to hot up. And they had to heat up. Domen Novak took over from Sylvain Dillier. The break's 9 men were taking the gap above 6 minutes. 65 kilometres remain when there was a shocking crash. Michał Kwiatkowski looking like he was the worst off. Dillier was dropped, and when it came to the Tre Capi, the fight for position at the front meant that the gap was disappearing rapidly. Usual fare in San Remo, you might think. Inside the last 40 Ks, and then a crash that would make the day even more epic. Tadej Pogacar down, Wout van Aert with him. Jorgensen and several others also caught up. Mathieu van der Poel was chasing to get back on. And they did come back, but only once the start of the Cipressa was underway. Pogacar coming from the back of the bunch at the beginning of the Cipressa, and then having his teammate Brandon McNulty light it up at the front. After that it was Isaac del Toro. One huge acceleration from the Mexican, everybody suddenly playing catch up. And after those few hundred metres of power, it would be Tadej Pogacar himself to launch. Very quickly there were 3. Filippo Ganna this time unable to hang on. Tom Pidcock playing his role. Van der Poel, of course, was there. But Pogacar battered, bruised, half his skin suit on show. How was he feeling? A bit of a headwind then before the Poggio. They got to the Poggio and another acceleration. Suddenly Van der Poel was in trouble, and with 3 Ks to go to the top, Tadej Pogacar was doing what he hadn't really managed to do much of before: drop Mathieu van der Poel. Pogacar and Pidcock went over the top and were together on the bottom, chasing them Wout van Aert as they looked at each other. He couldn't get around. It's Pogacar at the front. It's Pogacar there. Pogacar's still there. Pidcock's trying to get around. Will it be the Briton? Will it be the Briton? Pogacar, Pidcock, all the way to the line. It's done. He has done it. he pulls off a feat that many thought unachievable in the modern era. Tadej Pogacar wins in San Remo, and only the Roubaix cobbles now stand in his way of all 5 monuments. Heroic, Herculean, historic. This was the Pogacar era. This was his time. The top 10 looking like this, with Pogacar, Pidcock, Van Aert, Pedersen and Strong in the top 5, but the headline at the top of that list.
Today, the most complicated race for you to win, but you have won it, and it's been even harder because of the crash. Tell us all.
Yeah, I don't know. When I crashed, for a second I thought it's all over, because I had to crash in Imperia just before the most important part of the race is not ideal, and but luckily I was quickly back on the bike, and not too much damage to me or to bike a little bit. But then I saw my team, Florian and Felix. They left out everything to come back to the front, and then they gave me back hope, and the legs were still okay, and Brandon and Isaac did the rest on the Cipressa. And so today, if there's no team, probably I would just go straight. I would not go right in Cipressa, but straight to the finish line.
Did you get...
Well, that's it. The will he, the won't he? He certainly will. Tadej Pogacar wins that difficult one, the one that had got away to this point. Pidcock in second, a resurgent Van Aert in third. Pogacar ticks off the one that was looking the most complicated. The classics continue, and you can see the quest towards Roubaix glory on TNT Sports.
Hello and welcome to short highlights of the Ronde van Brugge. It's the 50th birthday edition of this race, but really, if I'm honest, it's a completely new Men's World Tour one-day race this year, because it's now focused entirely on Bruges. We've moved away from De Panne, we've moved away from De Moeren, and lots of people were wondering what kind of race we would get this year. Would it be a turn-up for the crosswinds that have so often plagued De Moeren and made, well, the 4 days, then the 3 days of De Panne, then the Brugge De Panne, and now this, the Ronde van Brugge, such a delight to watch. Well, I can tell you the crosswinds did turn up. One big loop to the south of Bruges first, and then 2.5 laps of that upper circuit, the local circuit that you can see there, of 59 kilometres. As I say, the wind turned up. We had no breakaways because there was so much impetus at the front of the peloton to try and stay out of trouble back there as the splits happened, that it just meant we bowled along, constantly splitting, regrouping, splitting and regrouping. This was one of the first crashes. It was always going to be a day to be cautious of crashes after last year's race, which was so crash-filled in the closing stages. Talking of closing stages, 80 kilometres to go. Once again, a split in the peloton splitting time and time again. Dylan Groenewegen, after his 2 wins at the weekend in the Montserrat race and Bredene Kokseide as well, with his team fully protecting him all day. The defending champion was the Colombian Juan Sebastian Milano. And as we came to the line with 1 lap to go, the British rider Josh Giddings leading across the line, winning the only intermediate sprint point of the day and a cash prize, I believe, to go with it too. Things were regrouping. Dylan Groenewegen, no panic, rear wheel puncture, bike change, and his teammates had dropped back to pace him back in as well. He was looking really good, as were his Unibet Rose Rockets team, I have to be said, supporting him well throughout the day. All eyes were on an expected clash between him and Jasper Philipsen of Alpecin Premier Tech. But Alpecin Premier Tech were not having the best of days. They were gradually losing more and more numbers from the front of the race. This group looked like they were completely out of it, the second group. We were calling them the peloton. They were the second group on the road. But a brilliant ride by Total Energies and Team Flanders Baloise brought things back. Just very, very gradually. Despite the presence of Julius Johansson and others at the front of that group who were trying to keep themselves clear, it would come back together again, but I can tell you it would split again. And this was the pattern throughout the whole 203 kilometres of the Ronde van Brugge. Astana were particularly impressive. The Russian rider Gleb Syriza doing a lot of work at the front. This was a crash for one of the EF riders, Vincenzo Albanese, the Italian, coming up against the death ridge at the edge of the road. But compared to last year's Brugge de Panne race, actually, this was a fairly smooth passage. Soft landing, thankfully for them. And we had an incident with a protester on the road as well. And that would cause a kind of ricochet crash that would take out Juan Sebastian Milano, last year's winner, the Colombian for UAE Team Emirates. Rune Hedegaard staying back there to check on him. And he was gone from the race. Once again, we had a reforming peloton after the split down the middle. The sun had come out. We had, honestly, all kinds of weather on this Wednesday afternoon in West Flanders. Former winner Yves Lampaert on the attack for Soudal Quickstep, freed up seemingly to have a go himself, even though they had Laurence Rex there with a good option for the sprint too. Davide Ballerini was absolutely flying for XDS Astana. He had multiple attacks, kept having a go. And while he was doing that, the splits were still happening down the field. This was a great late move by the big German, Max Volscheid, for Lidl Trek. I can tell you it wasn't to survive. It was a nice one, though, inside or going into the final 2 kilometres, Volscheid being caught. And all of the favourites that we'd expected to be there were there. Jasper Philipsen was a long way back, though. And so was Dylan Groenewegen. They were waiting. Nobody wanted to go too soon. It would be Gleb Syriza who would lead across the bridge and into the final 500 metres for XDS Astana, with Max Canter in good position behind him. Jasper Philipsen had one last lead-out rider, and Groenewegen was being brought through as well. Philipsen had a little look over his right-hand shoulder, saw Stefan de Schut near, and had realised he had to start his sprint. Philipsen started on the right-hand side in the blue-white helmet, and Dylan Groenewegen got into his slipstream, came up just in time, and took him on the line. And with that, Dylan Groenewegen had won 3 races in a row, which started on Friday, but crucially, taking Unibet Rose Rocket's first World Tour win. Remarkable for the team, who've only been around for 3 years, and they've now reached this point with their marquee signing this year, Dylan Groenewegen, who's had a new lease of life. Sad moment for Amaury Capiot, looking like he may have broken something as well in the finishing straight there. The Belgian rider, he was starting to look very good again these last few weeks, Capiot, so that was a shame to see. But Groenewegen, 81 career victories, and it's like he's back to his best. He last won this race in 2019 back in De Panne. But this is Dylan Groenewegen Mark II. Maybe it's even Dylan Groenewegen Mark III. He is loving his time in what is now the French team, Unibet Rose Rockets. Winning ahead of Jasper Philipsen and Max Canter, Stanislav Anilokowski, as he so often is, always right there. There was the podium. Philipsen close, but not close enough. And Dylan Groenewegen now on 4 wins this year. Join us tomorrow live for the women's edition.
A week on Friday before the Tour of Flanders, it's dress rehearsal time. And the world's best came dressed ready to go, including Mathieu van der Poel, who was hoping to make it 3 wins from 3 at the E3 Saxo Classic E3 Prijs Harelbeke, as it's been known down the years. Not everybody was ready to go. Some tired faces despite the lunchtime start. But 208 kilometres with all the cobbles and bergs you're likely to see in the Ronde itself, making it for a really interesting day. The Kleine Ronde, the small Tour of Flanders. A slight change to the parkour this year. An extra Oude Kwaremont. Paterberg coming before Kwaremont in this race. And an extra passage too of the E3 called the Karmel-Beekstraat. With 95 kilometres to go, 6 riders were at the front. There was a second group on the road at 2.5 minutes. The peloton at 3.5. 6 strong riders up the road as well, including Stan de Wulf, who was back racing in the classics for the first time in a while. Timo Kielik launched his move. He was followed well with a second group on the road. And this attacking group suddenly became part of the race. Plankert there from Alpecin Premier Tech. Of course, that's the team of Mathieu van der Poel, hoping to make it 3 wins in 3 years. First time up the Quaremont and moves aplenty. And problems too just afterwards for Florian Vermeers. Not too far from the Tyenberg, the place where this race traditionally splits. You had to have a bike change. Already starting the hill prior to the Tyenberg, the Kortekeer behind. And it looked as though his race might well be over in terms of being at the business end. On the Tyenberg itself, Tim van Dijk confirming that his form is really there. Mathieu van der Poel racing with an injured hand after crashing in San Remo. But looking brilliant as he closed the gap on Tom Bonen's old stomping ground. Van der Poel himself then decided to ride. His two previous victories here had seen solo exhibitions. He was riding as if he was solo already. Behind there looked around at each other at 2 minutes. And the chase group that Van der Poel reached was at 1 minute 20. But he didn't stay with them too long. On the Boineberg, 64 k's from the finish, he was away again. Still a minute away from the lead. And with just over 50 kilometres to go, it was usual classic stuff. Different groups form, others get chased down. It gets mightily tactical as well. Mathieu van der Poel was about to catch the front of the race just before the Paterberg. And it was at this point where he attacked solo to win the race in 2024 for the first time. Stan de Wulf could hang with him for a while, but then there was no chance. And Mathieu van der Poel was alone at the front of the race, 42.5 kilometres from the conclusion of it. It looked as though we're about to see another Van der Poel solo show. His gap was almost a minute. But then things were changing. The groups were getting organised behind. Stan de Wulf was fading. And Florian Vermeers, who'd miraculously worked his way all the way back through the race, alongside Jonas Abrahamsen and Per Strandhageners, with the quartet doing the chasing. The climbs were out the way inside the final 20 kilometres, and what had been a minute suddenly went down to just over half a minute. Was there a chance to bring back Mathieu van der Poel? The gap went down with just over 5 kilometres to just over 10 seconds. It looked as though it could be heartbreak as Van der Poel was on for a three-peat. The peloton was chasing too, but probably not quick enough. They were at just over half a minute. Then, 1 kilometre to go, it looked as though Van der Poel was caught. Florian Vermeers looking for that final turn to close the gap, but he didn't want to be the one to do it. So he looked behind. Abrahamsen did the same. Hagener shook his head, and de Wulf had been in the break all day long. Van der Poel continued to ride. One final effort, and yet again they hesitated behind. Van der Poel, so often in a league of his own. This time though, they'd worked hard to get him back. They had him back, but Van der Poel gave them that little bit of bait. They thought they'd caught him. Then he had one final effort in him, and it was enough. Dramatic, high octane, full of entertainment. This was an Erdrie race to remember. It was finally 3 from 3 for MVDP. A 60th career win on the road in addition to all of his mountain bike and cyclocross prizes. This one though will be remembered for the finale. Van der Poel, Hagenes and Vermeers the podium. Stan de Wulf with a brilliant result from the morning breakaway, and 5th for Jonas Abrahamsen. All smiles for the final photo, but there will be questions asked about why Van der Poel wasn't caught in the end. What a win though from him. He now joins Cancellara and Bras as winners on 3 occasions of this race. New name, same old brilliant racing. What was known as Gent-Wevelgem for the 88th edition was going to be in Flanders fields from Middelkerke to Wevelgem. Plenty of superstars here too. Former winner Wout van Aert up against Mathieu van der Poel, hoping to become the first Dutch winner since 1989. A change to the start in the beginning on the coast, but after the Muur, the hill zone, the Plug Streets gravel sectors, a visit back to the hills, then a 35-kilometre run all the way to Wevelgem. 8 riders managed to get up the road. A lightning fast first hour, 51 k's an hour, produced 8 really strong riders. A maximum gap of 5.5 minutes was coming down considerably, and with 90 kilometres to go, the first Kemmelberg was taken on. As always, that hill shuffled, moved, and changed the groups. There were splits as they went into the Plug Streets, 3 gravel sectors, and the usual mechanical problems it brought too. Jasper Stuyven, the former winner of Milano-San Remo, was trying to make things happen at the front for a Soudal Quick-Step team that haven't won Gent-Wevelgem since 2012. And they were having further bad luck with Paul Magnier suffering one of those mechanical issues. He was their fastest finisher, but he'd have to be quick to get back as it was going crazy and chaos at the front. Next time up the Kemmelberg, again there were splits. This time with the breakaway in sight, it will be Wout van Aert who'd drive it on. Van der Poel and Vermeers were reacting the strongest. And Van Aert, who was rested on Friday, was up against the man who was caught, well, almost in the final kilometre on Friday, but still managed to win the race. Wout van Aert with Mathieu van der Poel, Florian Vermeers getting there too. Behind there was a strange crash for Ben Turner, and that took him out the race. And at the front, those who were left from the breakaway were with the 3 superstars driving the race on. Coming up to the final ascent of the Kemmelberg from the most difficult side, those passengers were dropped. So too, though, was Florian Vermeers. Wout van Aert was hanging on. Mathieu van der Poel was showing the strength we've seen in the last few Classics races from him. But Van Aert was close enough to stay at the front. And the 2 stars who've been competing against each other since they were youngsters on the crossfield had over a minute of a gap as they started the run back in. It was just over 10 seconds to Florian Vermeers. And by the time it got through the Mennen Gate, one of the many sobering reminders of conflict a century ago in this part of the world, the gap was coming down. Half a minute with 14 kilometres to go. Vermeers no longer a factor. He was about to be swallowed up by the marauding bunch. Rebel Bora Hansgrohe, Decathlon, the main chasers there. And they were getting the gap down inside 6Ks to just over 10 seconds. It's at this point that Alex Segaard threw the dice. He tried a late move in Norkere that didn't quite work out. A late move in Denain that brought him his first victory in a couple of years. Here he was at the front with 2 kilometres to go and 7 seconds was the gap. But he looked behind. Filippo Ganna was chasing. And they were all about to be caught a kilometre from the finish. It was déjà vu for Van der Poel. This time, though, he was caught completely. And with Segaard still out in front, behind they were ready launched to the sprint. Segaard lasting until 400 metres from the finish line. Former winner Binyam Girmay was there. Arnaud Delis, Matteo Trentin, but it was Lund, Watson and Philipsen who were about to go at it to the sprint. Lund having to go around Watson, Philipsen seeing the door open, Laporte tried to follow, and Jasper Philipsen there to bring it home. No Van der Poel at the front, no problem for Alpecin Premier Tech. They won that race for the first time in their history, and in Flanders fields in an historic fastest ever average speed of over 46 kilometers per hour. Jasper Philipsen was the winner. Jasper Philipsen winning in Flanders Fields, Tobias Lund in second, former winner Christophe Laporte in third. De Lee, Donaldson, Trentin, Mozzato, De Gent, Abramson and Sturven all making up the top 10. The Flemish Holy Week well underway. Jasper Philipsen picking up one of its first prizes. Just a few days before the Tour of Flanders, the 80th edition of Dwars door Vlaanderen offered riders a final chance to tune up before the Ronde itself. Some of the sport's biggest names were present. Tadej Pogacar wasn't, neither was Mathieu van der Poel, the latter a former winner of this Wednesday afternoon race. Pedersen back from illness. Philipsen was there and Van Aert also looking to race. Over 184.6 kilometres, starting in Brusselare and finishing in Waregem. Another excursion into the Flemish Ardennes. And 174 riders taking on the 12 hills and other cobbled sectors. This race nowadays centres around two loops, the first around the Knokteberg, the second taking on the Nolkerenberg. And at the top of the first passage of the Knokteberg, 18 of the world's biggest riders were already at the front of the race. 92 kilometres remained, and a race had been ridden at a lightning fast pace. All too much for Arnaud de Lee, who was dropped and would soon be pulling out of the race. The first group was caught with 85 k's remaining. The speed at this point almost 50 kilometres per hour average. Wout van Aert was on the move, and there were several riders who were trying to stick with him. His own team was looking good as well. Christophe Laporte, a former winner of the race, was up there. Per Strenhageners looking strong, and he'd take that strength into the several hills that then came. He was doing enough to drop Tobias Lund, one of the candidates to win if it came to a sprint at the end. On the top of the Horton, a new group was coming together with 52 k's to go. Nicolas Larsen, Romain Grégoire and Thomas Gachignard had a little gap. Then they moved to the Eckenberg, the hardest climb in the second half of the race. 10% maximum gradient for 1.2 kilometres. At the front they were riding as hard as they could. Philippe Ogana was suffering from a mechanical issue. Broken handlebars this time, that after a bike change just a few kilometres before. At the same time as that was happening, at the front of the race, Wout van Aert was doing a madness. Showing so much power on a different level and riding away from the rest of what was left of the peloton. He'd already showed form in Flanders Fields on Sunday and was straight to Gachignard, who'd been left behind by his breakaway companions. Talking of the breakaway, Van Aert was across to it with 39 k's to go. Ganna was having his second bike change in as many kilometres. And Van Aert building an advantage at the front with Frenchman Grégoire and track world champion Larsen from Denmark. Into the final 35 k's, there were attacks, moves, chases, groups, and it continued to change. Sheffield and Tim van Dijken were joined by Florian Vermeers with 24 k's on the clock. And to the penultimate climb, the Nolkerenberg up the cobbles saw Romain Grégoire dropped. Larsen would stay with Van Aert, who'd been second in this race a year before when he had two teammates with him. Remember the 3 versus 1? Paulus doing a standard versus Visma. But this time Van Aert was hanging on, looking to win his first Belgian cobbled race for over 2 years. And almost half a minute of a gap started to come down. Van Baarle, Watson and others riding. 15 seconds the gap up the final climb of the race. The Nolkerenberg from the paved side this time, and Larsen dropped. Wout van Aert was going to go it all alone in the final 10 kilometres. Madouas tried to chase. Van Aert still alone and into the final 5 k's with 16 seconds. The final cobbled obstacle done, and a new chase was developing. Florian Vermeers and Filippo Ganna. Ganna, who'd never won a one-day race in his career, but just 5 seconds behind as Van Aert went into the final kilometre. We were in for a tremendous finish. Filippo Ganna's gaining behind as well. There's a huge group as well. 300 metres to the line. It's Wout van Aert at the front. What a finish here. And look at Filippo Ganna. Look at Filippo Ganna. He comes into the slipstream. Oh, it's heartbreak for Wout van Aert. Heartbreak for Wout van Aert. Delight for Filippo Ganna. And his own greatest classic success is confirmed. It was the fastest ever Dwars door Vlaanderen by almost 2 kilometres per hour. It was won by Ganna, who was a one-day race victor after having threatened to do so years and years throughout his career. Van Aert having to settle for second and caught less than 100 metres from the finish line. Søren Varnenshaw will win the sprint for third place, just ahead of Binyam Girmay. A 15th victory of the season for the Ineos Grenadiers. They're having their best start for a long time. Ganna is coming into one-day form, winning a race for the maiden time in his career. 38 other race wins before then, but he's now a semi-classic winner. Galloping up to Van Aert and taking the victory just down the road from Belgium's most famous racecourse. Tour of Flanders itself promises to be a cracking race. You can watch it live and on demand. It's on TNT Sports and HBO Max. The Ronde van Vlaanderen, the Tour of Flanders, the race of the people in a cycling-mad region. The most important day of the year, and this time they had home hopes. Remco Evenepoel as debutant. Wout van Aert was getting better, but up against Pogacar, Pedersen and Van der Poel, it was going to be tough. Riders lined up in Antwerp for the longest Flanders in several decades. 1988, the last time the race was longer than this 278 Ks. 16 hills, 6 separate cobbled sectors, 22 big obstacles, and a very big day out in the Flemish Ardennes. Plenty of wind forecast, bit of rain as well, and it would take a while for the day's break to go. When the flag was waved just outside of Antwerp, Flanders' biggest city, this was the situation. 175 riders on the road, and just after 10 a.m. they set off trying to get into a break. A break that would form with 13 riders. Sylvain Dillier, the biggest name in there. Honorary mention too for Luc Lamperti, who won a stage of Paris-Nice. Today Pogacar and company were working. But this then happened. A level crossing coming down halfway in the peloton. The break's gap at 3 minutes 24. The local train coming through to Brussels. But those who got through the barriers then forced to wait as per the UCI rule for the rest of the peloton. The same rule, however, doesn't govern any gap to the breakaway, and that 5+ minutes was about to stand. Those in the break were excited about it. Edoardo Zamperini getting the crowd going, and they held on to the Quaremont for the first time. There was a strange cash for Connor Swift. UAE were working hard. By the time it came to the Molenberg, the race was about to change. One of the famous left turns in modern cycling. Over the little bridge, up a difficult cobbled sector that rolls back the years to old times, and suddenly there was a different group at the front. Some mega strong riders there. Van der Poel, Pogacar, Evenepoel, Van Aert, alongside Pedersen. This was all of the stars. Anybody who missed out would not see the front of the race again. Well, the weather was Flandrien. And the strongest of Flandrians would be ready to take on the front of the race. With 78 kilometres to go, they'd reached the breakaway. Then it was time for the second Quadremont. A second Quadremont, meaning it was time for Tadej Pogacar. But who could follow him? Wout van Aert was the first. Mathieu van der Poel had to move his way through plenty of traffic behind. Pedersen was in town, as was Remco Evenepoel. Questions about the ability perhaps to handle positioning. But a race open from a long time didn't just delight the fans, it would also delight Evenepoel. What an image. Thousands of supporters in spring. Evenepoel, Van Aert, Van der Poel, Pogacar and Pedersen. Cycling's 5 classic stars, and all together at the front of a Tour of Flanders for the first time. The Paterberg, though, saw distance. And it saw distance for Van Aert, Pedersen, and then just about for Remco Evenepoel. With 51 kilometres to go, Evenepoel still chasing, just a handful of seconds the difference, but heading to the Koppenberg, it was a sight we've seen before in the Ronde. Pogacar, a 2-time winner to this point. Van der Poel hoping to become the outright only 4th-time winner. Pogacar, though, couldn't drop Van der Poel on the Koppenberg, but they both could put time into Evenepoel chasing further on. The last time up the Quadremont, the gap to Evenepoel was 16 seconds, and finally, there was a gap then between the back wheel of Pogacar and the front wheel that belonged to Van der Poel. Pogacar had used the Quadremont as a springboard to attack in his 2 previous Flanders wins, and it looked like he was trying to do the same here. The world champion looking to win for a record-equalling 3rd time and prevent Van der Poel from winning for that 4th occasion. The gap at the top of the Quadremont suggested that the race was still open, though. 13 seconds to the bottom of the Paterberg. And a highly powerful Pogacar was about to put the race beyond doubt. Van der Poel was only just coming into the shot. And despite his best efforts, Pogacar was powering away to glory. 40 seconds with 6Ks to go. Van der Poel having 2nd place secured. Evenepoel was up in 3rd. But yet again, once more, a world champion, another monument win, a record-equalling 3rd win in Flanders for who else but Tadej Pogacar. Mathieu van der Poel just behind him. And what a debut behind them for Remco Evenepoel in Flanders' finest race. There is hope for the Belgian drought to be ended soon, but perhaps not while this man's about. Tadej Pogacar wins for a 3rd time and joins a top list of 3-time winners. It's Pogacar, Van der Poel, Evenepoel, Van Aert and Pedersen. A famous top 5 after a very famous, frantic and hard-fought race. Pogacar does it again. 2 monuments from 2 this season. That's now 4 in a row in total. And he's still not lost since regaining that world title. Next up, Paris-Roubaix. A sunny day for Scheldeprijs, the oldest classic in Flanders that nowadays begins in the Netherlands. Starting in Terneuzen in Zeeland, one of the windiest places in the planet. Today was different though. Hardly a movement in flagpole at all, but there was plenty of movement onto the podium. Some of the fastest sprinters in the world were ready for the unofficial Sprinters World Championship. One of 2 races that can have that title. Of course, the other being the Champs-Élysées finish of the Tour de France. The first 75 kilometres of this race nowadays take place in the Netherlands. And then it's down to Schoten, 100th finish in the satellite town of Antwerp this year. 3 3/4 local laps, 4 passages of the cobbled Brugstraat. 205 kilometres, not too much elevation. This one invariably ends in a big bunch sprint. Marcel Kittel, a 5-time record winner of the Scheldt de Prijs, and the only man to have won it ever on 3 consecutive occasions. Tim Merlier could join him on that note today. They'd have to chase down a breakaway of 6 riders first. Hartel, Killy, Dissel, Naat, Jurich and Carpenter were up the road. Merlier was racing for just the 2nd time this season and for the first time this month after having had a knee injury during the winter. His team, like many, were working hard. The Unibet Rosa Rockets with Kittel, that record winner, in the car, trying to support Dylan Groenewegen, who was looking to win for the first time. But there weren't many little wins on the road. Bidon missed again. It was thirsty work out there, 22 degrees. The break were the first into Schoten with 3 full laps remaining. And the gap at this point was just under a minute. There was a mechanical issue for Jasper Philipsen, former winner of the race and 2nd place in the last couple of years. But there was still plenty of time to get back on. This, as far as Scheldt de Prijs go, was one of the more pedestrian editions for a while. Philipsen will be back with just under 50 k's to go. And then we had early attacks from Lidl Trek just to try and shake things up. Edward Turns and Max Walscheid, their 2 main sprinters. But the attacks were calmed down. The breakaway was halved with just under 40 k's to go. Killy, the United States rider, Carpenter, his compatriot, and Dissel, the Netherlander, were still there. The Flemish flags flew. And 40 seconds was still the gap. Party time in Schoten, local bank holiday, and plenty of people on the side of the road as the other 3 riders from the break were absorbed. This scary moment, however, had us all wondering if the control of those on the side of the road was adequate enough. Thankfully, there was no further incident on that front. Matteo Moschetti was at the front until he had a mechanical just as his team were trying to make it difficult for everybody else. They then heard that on the radio and slowed up as Moschetti, a podium finisher in 2025, had to have a bike change with 24 k's to go. The Rockets were still looking to blast off. Moschetti returned. And the bell lap was taken by the break. But all bets still were on for a bunch sprint. Bahrain positioning well. Picnic Postinel rode valiantly, keeping their riders in position. And then, unfortunately, the usual Scheldt de Prijs spills. The crash taking out Milan Menten. And then this that would take down Fretin, Groenewegen, Teutenberg and several others. Groenewegen would not be adding the Scheldt de Prijs to his extensive palmarès. Total Energie and several other teams tried to take control. Philipsen, Merlier, Jordi Meus, Pascal Ackermann was still well placed. Phil Bauhaus had missed out on an opportunity to sprint. He'd been caught up in the crash as well. Into the final 4 kilometres. And finally the break would be caught. The last survivor being the Dutchman Bram Dissel. Time for Meus and company to move up. He had Van Poppel to position him, and inside the final 1.5 kilometres, the chaos again reigned. This time it was who would go when. Max Walscheid for Lidl Trek having the first go, but how would it pan out? Still keeping his powder dry is Philipsen, but it's going to be Jordi Meus to move up now. Jordi Meus on the wheel of Walscheid. Coming on the left-hand side as we look at it here is Tim Merlier. Tim Merlier now hits the front. Merlier is there. Can he do it again? It's a hat trick. He will. He will. And Tim Merlier, after just 1 day of racing this year, is right back with the very best. He certainly was. The first win on Belgian soil for the year for the big Belgian team. Soudal Quickstep not enjoying their Flemish spring to now, but finally a win And Merlier winning the Scheldeprijs with the least amount of racing prior to the race in his legs of anybody ever. Just a second race day of the season. And a big victory. First there was Kittel, now there's Merlier. 3 wins in a row for both of them. Bittner second, Janier in third, Rajovic with a great result, Ergen up in fifth as well. Philipsen, the former winner, down in 8th. Tim Merlier joined on the podium by his son. Family watching on. And a brilliant victory in the Scheldeprijs for the Belgian. Paris-Roubaix is more than a race. A challenge to oneself, a certain surrendering to lady luck. But Tadej Pogacar had needed no luck to win what he's won so far this season. 3 days undefeated. Here up against Mathieu van der Poel. Pogacar looking to win all 5 monuments. Van der Poel hoping to become the first to win 4 in a row in hell. This 123rd edition of a Sunday in Hell looked like this. The usual nigh on 100-kilometre ride to Troisville, to the gates to hell, and then the 3 key sections. The 3 5-star sectors, beginning with the Arenberg Trench, and then moving into the last 50 k's, Mont-Saint-Pével, and in the last 20 kilometres, Carrefour de l'Arbre. Over 54 kilometres on pavé, 30 sectors in reverse order. There was a tailwind for most of the day, and leaving Compiègne, 258 kilometres on the map, 175 riders were all dreaming. There was no breakaway by the time we got to the first cobbled sector. We were all set for one of the fastest editions ever. Wout van Aert suffered an early mechanical, but who wasn't suffering mechanicals in this edition? It was action-packed, it was full of drama. Tadej Pogacar with 120 kilometres to go onto a neutral service bike and wondering if he was ever going to see the front again. He saw his own bike again. There was clear stress, worry and panic as Pogacar was looking to do something special. Already a winner in San Remo, only the Roubaix cobbles stood between himself and becoming a fully fledged, full monuments man, holding all 5 at the same time, something no rider has ever done. Into the final 100 kilometres, and he was back at the front and ready for the Arenberg. Into the Arenberg Trench, and so much still about to happen. Drama for Mathieu van der Poel. Still over a kilometre of it to ride, and he was off his bike, running cyclocross style, looking for a teammate, in the end deciding he couldn't clip in to his teammate's bike, walking backwards down the trench, seeing a teammate fix a front wheel, and then having to take the bike. At this stage, Van der Poel chasing a gap of more than 2 minutes. It looked like his race was over. A second stop and waiting for that spare bike. The gap just growing. But he started to work at it, chopping off the best part of a minute to get it down to 1:30. The mechanicals continued. This time it was Ganna, Pogacar changing bikes once again. But at the front of the races, Wout van Aert had his own issues. Van der Poel was to within 1 minute and 20. Van Aert 30 seconds off Pogacar and company. And still 60 kilometres remained. Van Aert would then come back. And the race headed into another key section. Van der Poel on his way back, or was he? This was brewing as one of these stories. He was within 20 seconds when on sector 12, Wout van Aert made sure he made his move. A selection that for the moment only Pogacar and Pearson could follow. The cobbles rattling, the bones shaking, the body's hurting. The average speed at this point was still above 49 kilometers per hour. Gannat was suffering yet another incident. He even ended up on the deck. It certainly wasn't his day. Pedersen had been dropped off Mont-Saint-Pével, and the gap to Van der Poel was at 30 seconds. But Pogacar couldn't shake Van Aert. Shake of the head was what he was getting. Van der Poel almost created a problem for himself. Pogacar surviving the point where he'd crashed the year before, and when it came to Carrefour de l'Arbre, giving his all to try and drop Van Aert. Van Aert himself, though, was using his own skills as Van der Poel was making one last-ditch attempt to close the gap. But it was still open, it was still at half a minute, and when Staven attacked the chasing group, they didn't look to have a response. Paris-Roubaix was coming to the velodrome. One of these two will be a brand new winner in Paris-Roubaix. Half a lap to go now, and it's Wout van Aert who starts the sprint early. Van Aert is there and he hits the front. Now can Pogacar get it? No, he can't. No, he can't. The gaps are opening up, and today Pogacar, having got this close, having got so close, within touching distance, can't do it. It's Wout van Aert, and it is wonderful. Jasper Stuyven rode to third place. Mathieu van der Poel making sure he was there with Laporte behind. But Wout van Aert, after the injuries and illness, the long waits between big wins, he got the congratulation from even his biggest, most respected rival. Van der Poel the first to come and congratulate him. It was worth the pain, worth the wait, and for the Fleming, the perseverance paying off. This Melissa Bikes men's team winning the race for the first time in their history. They've been coming here decades, and they denied Pogacar the chance to hold all 5 monuments at once. Wout van Aert with one of the most special moments in his career. His last win having been on the Champs-Élysées, this one in the Roubaix Velodrome. It's a French-ridden race, but yet again it's Belgian-owned. And Wout van Aert is this year's Flemish hero. One of the races of the century. One of the wins we will never forget. Wout van Aert and dreams coming true in Paris-Roubaix.
Happy faces earlier today at the start of the Brabantse Pijl in Beersel. We're in Belgium with Quinten Hermans on the start podium. We have Thibaut Del Grosso making a young fan happy with an autograph. And a former winner here in Benoit Cosnefroid, winning this race 2 years ago, beating these two guys, Dylan Teuns and Tim Wellens. 127 riders at the start line today, 19 teams for a race of 162.6 kilometres, just shy of 2,000 metres of elevation. We start to the southwest of the Belgian capital of Brussels and then make our way to the local circuit in Overijse, which we are going to do 3 times with the climbs of the Hertstraat, the Moskestraat, Holstheide and the infamous S-Bend just a few hundred metres before the finish. The breakaway of the day attacked straight from the gun. 2 riders for the Beat Cycling Club powered by Saxo, Michiel Koppens and Bram Dissel. 2 riders as well for Tarteletto Isorex with Fabrice Lefebvre and Jonah Keeley. Wojtek Minek, the Czech rider for Burgosbourg Pellet, and Cedric Bakke Christoffersen, a Norwegian rider of the Unibet Rosa Rockets. Halfway into the race and the gap is just 2 minutes with Tim Wellens back in action. Broke his collarbone in Kuurne-Brussel-Kuurne all the way at the start of the classic season, but after surgery and recovery, he is back in the race. Our breakaway never really got that much of a gap from the peloton because it's a rather short race at 162 kilometres. So 3.5 minutes was all they got as we crossed the finish line for the first time for 3 laps of 19.8 kilometres. Dissel and Kili were part of the breakaway in Scheldeprijs as well, knowing each other pretty good after that adventure because they stayed away for quite a long time and they represent their team in the break of the day really, really well. But the first time up the Hertstraat, a cobbled climb, the action starts with Tim Wellens on the attack. Good to have him back in the peloton. Must have been hard to miss out on all the spring classics when you're the Belgian national champion. And from this point on, it was full-on attacks all the way to the finish line. 4 short climbs on the local circuit, but they come in quick succession, are evenly spread over the 19.8 kilometre long lap. And that makes for really attractive racing. Next one to attack is Florian Vermeers after that crash in Arenberg last weekend in Paris-Roubaix. It's good to have him back. Luckily, no injuries for him. And he wants to shine one more time, he said, in this last race of his very long classic season. But he soon will be caught, and we have new attacks happening with former German champion Max Schachmann. And that means we're making our way to the Moskestraat and the finish line. And then our breakaway is caught. We have a complete peloton with 2 more laps to go. But there's hardly a minute to breathe as we attack the Moskestraat yet again. It's a very tight squeeze to get into this cobbled climb. One rider down on the deck, out on docks. Gets a hit in the private parts there. Very painful. And this attack here by Romain Grégoire of the Groupama FDJ United team. Very powerful move here by Romain Grégoire. Quickly followed there by Alpecin Premier Tech and all the riders over the top of this very short but very steep Moskestraat climb. 2 leaders then, with Ramses de Bruyne on the wheel of Romain Grégoire. We've got one more rider trying to bridge across, and that is Benoît Cosnefroy. Initially, Valentin Madouas and also Marcel Kamproubi tried to follow this move by former winner Benoît Cosnefroy. But in the end, the former winner, the winner of the 2024 edition, was the only one making it across to the lead. So we have Grégoire, De Bruyne and Cosnefroy in the lead with just a 15-second gap. And that was small enough for these 3 riders and a little bit of help of the motorbike to make it across. Charmich, Milan Lanhoven and a teammate for Ramses de Bruyne in Thibaut Del Grosso. That makes 6 leaders, and then 1 more rider manages to bridge across. And that is Jelle Johannink of the Unibet Rose Rockets team. We're back on the Moskestraat, and for Johannink there in the pink and blue, that is a little bit too much. But we can see the peloton inching ever closer. 10 kilometers in the gap is down to just 13 seconds. It's going to be a very tight final here with Cosnefroy, Del Grosso, Grégoire, Lanhoven, Charmich and Ramses de Bruyne. And on this long stretch of road on the way back to Overijse, the gap is becoming too small for our 6 leaders to hold. And in the finale, they will be caught on the S-bend. And you can see exactly why they call it that. We're almost at the Flamme Rouge. Our 6 leaders are caught. And now it's all about timing that sprint. Mathieu Burgodeau is the first one to attack for Total Energie. And it's a pretty powerful attack that he places, but the road still ramps up, and it's all about timing here. And yeah, it was a little bit too early in the end for Burgodeau. And now you have to keep the pressure on the pedals. Sandro Marissa is one of the attackers there, but in the green and white, it's Fernando Barcelo for Caja Rural Seguros. But from his wheel, a young man from Denmark, Anders Voorlegger for Jaco Alula, and he wins the Brabantse Pijl just ahead of Quinten Hermans and Benoît Cosnefroy. A little bit of a surprise winner. Not his first professional win. 2 years ago he won in the Tour of Slovakia, but absolutely his biggest win. Anders Voorlegger of Jaco Alula following that move there. Hermans, also Romain Grégoire and Benoît Cosnefroy, the riders we had on the attack, managed to follow this move, but yeah, they don't have the energy yet. Not anymore, of course, to get past the very strong Danish rider, winner as well of stages in the Giro Next Gen and the Tour de l'Avenir. Anders Voorlegger beats Quinten Hermans, Cosnefroy, Grégoire, Prades, Dwesnes, Van Boven, Barcelo, Brady Gilmore and Alex Molenaar. And this is our podium, and this means that the Ardennes Classics have started. Amstel Gold Race on Sunday, Flèche Wallonne on Wednesday, and next Sunday, Liège-Bastogne-Liège.
The sun was out for the start of the 60th edition of the Amstel Gold Race. Matthias Skjelmose was back as defending champion. Remco Evenepoel and Julien Alaphilippe, two former world champions, looking to win this for the first time. The Belgian and Dutch champions were in attendance. And race director Leo van Vliet was in charge for the 30th and final time before retiring after this race. A race that had changed little in the last couple of years. The Kaalberg returning as the final climb in 2025, and it was the same today. 33 climbs in total in and around Dutch Limburg, centering around Valkenberg after starting in Maastricht and finishing in Berg on ter Bleed. 3,600 metres of climbing, 9 riders getting up and ahead of the game with almost 5 minutes of an advantage. Behind, the break was aggressively chased by pre-race favourite Remco Evenepoel, who'd lost out in a sprint alongside Tadej Pogacar to Skjelmose 12 months before. Into the final 90 kilometres, and that break gap had come down. The break was also breaking up. Xavier Sparren, the next to go with 60 kilometres remaining. Arts remaining at the front with Frigo. The selection continued to happen behind too. Arts then left behind with 46 kilometres to go. And Marco Frigo for NSN, the Italian, the strongest from the 9-man break. Things were about to change again though, with 42 kilometres remaining. Romain Grégoire decided to attack, and that was the time that Remco Evenepoel decided it was important to follow. Vauquelin was there, also Jorgensen, Skjelmose and a few others too. But there were still plenty of climbs to come. Frigo's gap of over half a minute would change, and the race would change when Vauquelin crashed. Jorgensen went down heavily with him, and only 3 were left chasing. Evenepoel, Grégoire and Skjelmose ahead of it. Jorgensen in some pain on the side of the road. The trio that had got away from that crash then got to the front of the race, catching Frigo with 36 kilometres to go. And putting time into the group behind it, had decided to try and reorganise. The steepest road in the Netherlands, the Kurtenberg, was where Marco Frigo would be dropped. Just unable to follow the accelerations put down by particularly Evenepoel with that seated power of his. Benoit Cosnefroy was leading the chase from behind for UAE. He'd finished in 3rd place at the Brabantse Pijl 2 days before this. The leading trio had almost half a minute, and they were on their way to the finish line to take the bell. On the Kaalberg, a problem for Romain Grégoire, and that was probably good news for Evenepoel and Skjelmose. Grégoire known as a particularly fast finisher. And as the bell was ringing, Skjelmose and Evenepoel would be feeling a bit of déjà vu. At the front of the Amstel Gold Race again, this time however without Tadej Pogacar for company. Their gap was almost a minute to the chasers, and with 10 kilometres to go, it was over that mark. They were going to the finish again. Onto the Kaalberg for the final time. Evenepoel would put in one more small dig. Skjelmose settling for the sprint. They had plenty of time to play with. Skjelmose looking to become the first rider to win back-to-back since Philippe Gilbert over a decade ago. And Evenepoel hoping to become the 11th Belgian winner. And as defending champion, he's going to have to take on Evenepoel, who goes from the back. It's Evenepoel, 175 metres from the line. He's launched his sprint, he's hit the front, and he's in front of Skjelmose. He's opening up the gap. This is Remco's time. This is Remco's moment. And Remco Evenepoel wins the Amstel Gold. A huge win for Remco Evenepoel. Classic he wanted to add to his collection. Skjelmose, defending champion, beaten. Evenepoel celebrating with his partner and his family. And in the sprint behind, Benoit Kuznefroy completing the podium. A great effort too from Marco Frigo from the break, finishing in the top 10. A comprehensive sprint win there for Remco Evenepoel. Evenepoel doing his best track sprinter's impression, it was that powerful. A 74th career win, a first Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe victory since the start of March. The team needed that, and Evenepoel's brought it. Top 10, classified check on your screen. Evenepoel, Skjelmose, Kuznefroy with Grégoire and Verstringer in the top 5. Schmidt, Versevenot, Witten, Kostju and Frigo rounding out the top 10. Remco Evenepoel, the 11th Belgian to lift the Amstel Gold Race Trophy. Another wonderful win for the Belgian, who now goes into the Ardennes week. The 90th edition of La Flèche Wallonne, the Walloon Arrow, and 200 kilometres in front of the 174 riders representing 25 teams, including 3 former champions, Julian Alaphilippe among them, and Kevin Vauquelin looking to improve on his brace of second place finishes. Matthias Skjelmose also contending, as indeed was Paul Sexas, the pre-event favourite at just 19 years of age. Extraordinary tyro. An amazing talent from the Decathlon CMA CGM squad, looking to taste victory in his first appearance in La Flèche Wallonne, which would make its way to a finishing circuit of just over 37 kilometres, including the fabled Mur de Huy, to conclude at the end of the second of the 3 Ardennes Classics. 11 climbs in total for the riders, and 6 riders taking the lead of the peloton in the early stages of the day. The early move launched almost from the start. Andreas Leknesund, the Norwegian champion, among those up front, pursued by the main peloton, towed along by the UAE Team Emirates XRG squad in the company of Ineos Grenadiers, Lidl Trek. Decathlon also doing plenty of work. Benoit Kuznefroy hoping to contend and shrugging off 1 or 2 little issues early on in the day as the French star, just one of a battalion of French riders with eyes on glory in Flèche Wallonne, just over the border in Belgium. Also up front, Jarny van der Leij for the AF Education Easy Post squad, looking to stay out front for as long as was reasonably possible. Jusson from the Total Energy squad, also proving to be amongst the strongest riders in that 6-rider breakaway on the first of 3 assaults on Mur de Huy. That was the signal for attacks from behind in the main peloton, and also the moment when we discovered that Julian Alaphilippe would not be able to contest for a 4th victory in La Flèche Wallonne. UAE squad continuing to command into the deep into the final, but Tobias Halland Johannesson among those riders implicated in a series of crashes. Finn Fisher-Black also claimed there, but Tobias Halland Johannesson will get back on a teammate's bike, swap back and try and race back into the main peloton as his teammate Leknesund and Jordi van der Leij continued to press on out front. Taking the bell at the top of the second and penultimate climb of Mur de Huy. The duo out front pursued by 2 companions from the early break in the main peloton, with the Bahrain Victoria squad of Lenny Martinez on the front of the peloton, for now at any rate, and Tobias Halland Johansson getting back into the main peloton on a spare bike. Stuart Bax also trying to race back up and into to make it a 4-rider group up front once more. Jakub Truba, the Czech Republic rider, also among that quartet, surviving from the early break. More problems and more crashes with Mark Hirschi seriously implicated here, and the former champion, another Tudor Pro Cycling Team rider, on the ground and in pain as the Groupama squad taking control at the front of the peloton and hoovering up Van der Leij and Stuart Bax from that early move, leaving just Andreas Leknesund up front into the closing stages. Decathlon escorting their man Paul Sexas into prime position as they arrived onto the lower slopes of the penultimate climb of the day, the Côte de Charav. Joursin for Valentin Paré-Pontre. No glory for the Soudal Quick-Step squad via their French climber. Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe and Tratnik trying to escort Jai Hindley to the front of the peloton. See what the Australian climber could potentially deliver on the day. And an early reach out from the Groupama squad as Ewan Costu tried to present Romain Gregoire with a slam dunk. But as they arrived into the final 800 metres of the day on the lower slopes of the Mur de Huy, Paul Sexas belled Tullet shoulder to shoulder. Mara Schmidt, the Swiss champion, moving up. Benoit Cosnefroy also in prime position. Romain Gregoire fighting hard to stay in contention. Filippo Zanna there for the Soudal Quick-Step squad, but starting to fade as Paul Sexas made his move inside the final 300 metres. Ben Tullet in his wake, not able to deal with the power of the 19-year-old Frenchman. Sexas launching his final sprint to the line, and there would be no denying the decathlon rider claiming a first victory for France since 2021. And racing to the line to become the youngest ever winner of La Flèche Wallonne. Behind, a mighty scrap for second. Won on this occasion by Mara Schmidt. The photo for third, won by Ben Tullet, ahead of Benoit Cosnefroy. Skelmoser, Bodan and the rest behind, left floundering in the wake of the flying Paul Sexas. Celebrations all round for the French riders. But Paul Sexas, who had a crash during the day, had shrugged that one off to deliver a stunning performance on Mur de Huy. Glory for Sexas, his 9th win of the season, his 7th win in a matter of just 2 weeks. Youngest ever winner of Flèche Wallonne by some considerable margin. Young Frenchman marches on. Schmidt in his wake. Great performance from Tullet, Cosnefroy, Skelmoser, Bodan Izagir, Martinez, Gregoire and Andres Krohn, all with stories to tell. But it's Paul Sexas celebrating at the end of La Flèche Wallonne 2026.
The last of the Spring Classics, a bridge to the Grand Tours. Liège-Bastogne-Liège, the old lady, 112th edition, and a massive, massive starting cast. Pidcock had made it over from the Tour of the Alps. All eyes, though, were on 19-year-old Paul Sexas, who in the midweek had become the youngest ever winner of Flèche Wallonne. He was up against Remco Evenepoel, a 2-time winner, Tadej Pogacar, a 3-time winner of Liège. 260 kilometres, 11 classified climbs, the oldest of the great Spring Classics. Leaving Liège, taking the quick route to Bastogne, just one climb along the way in terms of classified ascents, 10 on the way back, and all the famous names. Stocker, Eddy Merckx's playground, Haute-Levée, and then down towards La Redoute, the traditional battleground in this race before they go back towards Liège. But who would do it? An opportunity for a 4th win for Pogacar that would put him level with Argentin and Valverde. But that was under threat early on. A group of 52 riders up the road, including Remco Evenepoel and Egan Bernal. UAE and Decathlon were forced to chase. The gap was as high as 3 minutes and 40 at one stage, but with 135 kilometres to go, down to 2.5 minutes. Pogacar's UAE team was working hard, and they were having to sacrifice riders such as Tim Wellens with well over 120 kilometres still to ride. A lot of the bunch already distanced, and a mechanical at such an unlucky time for Tom Pidcock. He'd been getting back to racing after a nasty crash in Catalonia, winning a stage in the Alps, but
he would struggle to get back on. This race was going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The fastest ever Liège-Bastogne-Liège was 12 months ago. This was going to break all of those records, and by a long way too. In the front though, things were becoming a little strange. And with 90 kilometres to go, Evenepoel, Bernal and the rest were back in the bunch. Wellens had done his job. An unwillingness to cooperate properly at the front with the group too big meant that it came back rather quickly. So at the front, with Pidcock over a minute down and losing further time, Pogacar's men went to work to control things. They took it inside the final 50 kilometres too, bit by bit sapping the energy of the competitors. Then La Redoute, the big moment, as it happens most years. Benoît Cosnefroy performed a brief lead-out, and then it was down to Pogacar, with Evenepoel already slipping and sliding in the first few 100 metres. It didn't look like it was going to be the Belgians' day, and for a while it looked as though Pogacar was going to do what Poggy always does and ride away. But a look behind saw 19-year-old Sexas, hoping to become the youngest winner of the race in over 100 years, right on the wheel. A further few 100 metres up the hill, and the gaps were absolutely huge. The difference was stunning. Pogacar, the present, Sexas, the future, both together, both on another planet. Pogacar would put in dig after dig, and Sexas was still with him. Riding past the titans of yesteryear, and Pogacar even over himself there, looking to win for a fourth time. Over La Redoute though, they were together, and it was still race on, certainly between the top two. Behind they were playing catch-up, Matthias Skjelmose the closest in that game. But he was all alone, and with plenty of headwind towards Liège, he'd soon be caught. Evenepoel among the chasers. 30 kilometres to play for what looked already like it was going to be third place. Almost a minute of a gap for Sexas and Pogacar, the young man from Decathlon, a French team that's never won a monument despite existing for over 3 decades. And pulling hard. Onto the final climb, the Côte de Roche-au-Faucon. And it was 600 metres from the top that the gap opened up. Sexas suddenly blowing. Only riding a race of this distance for the 4th time in his career. The Worlds, the Euros, Lombardy and now this. But giving us a glimpse of what's to come in the next few years. Skjelmose behind would try again, but he'd be caught and Evenepoel would put in a dig with 4Ks to go. Pogacar by this point was a minute ahead of Sexas, the young Frenchman not worrying for his own second place on the podium. Tadej Pogacar was wearing a black armband, riding in memory of his late teammate Cristian Munoz, who sadly lost his life a few days before this. It was in memory of Munoz, but a 4th win for Pogacar in Liège. He's now level with Argentine and Valverde. The headlines on the day, though, written by Paul Sexas. After an earth-shattering day on the roads of the Ardennes, King Pog was not quite dethroned in Liège, but the prince, the promise, and now the pride of France is certainly Paul Sexas, the young 19-year-old winner in waiting, it seems. A 3rd place going to Remco Evenepoel, the longest of long sprints, pride, passion, and his own power guiding him towards the end there. Bernal, who'd been in that break with him early on, also finishing high up. France's 46 long years of hurt not quite done. Their last Liège winner still remains Bernard Hinault for the men, but Tadej Pogacar has done it again. It's now 5 Slovenian wins in the last 7 years. Pogacar, Sexas and Evenepoel, the top 3. So the end of the Spring Classics. What a spring for Pogacar. Only Roubaix was missing. Sexas, though, certainly present. Fast forward to the Tour. Could be an interesting one, eh?